Motivation. What motivates us as humans day to day to partake in all the activities that we do? We go to our 9 to 5s, we start side hustles, we go to the gym, but what are the factors that actually impact how motivated we feel about these things? We live in a world of quick dopamine and instant gratification, where discipline is becoming ever harder to exercise. Discipline is often required when motivation is absent, but unfortunately, in a world where we're working longer for less, motivation is often hard to muster. This is where understanding how our intrinsic motivation and natural mental fuel comes from. When most people think about motivation, they think about rewards and punishment, or carrots and sticks. This is what psychologists call extrinsic motivation. Do the task, get the reward, or avoid the punishment. There are 3 forms of motivation. Number 1, survival. We need to survive, to eat, and in troubled times, not get eaten, but also to find a mate and try and continue our species. Then, motivation 2.0. This is where carrots and sticks come in. We do a task to reap the reward or to actually avoid the punishment. This is a lot more common motivation used in general corporate life. We still see it everywhere. Salaries, bonuses, grades, and gold stars. It's been ingrained in us since we started school. Now, for routine mechanical tasks, this can work just fine. But here's the problem. When it comes to creativity, problem solving, and long-term fulfillment, carrots and sticks tends to backfire. Now that's where motivation 3.0 comes in. In this video, I'm going to be outlining what self-determination theory is, and using Daniel H. Pink's book Drive, I'm going to teach you about the 3 fundamental psychological needs that can help us to sustain motivation and not have to rely on discipline. Something in this current instant gratification world is very hard to actually practice. Discipline is necessary, but if we can trick our brain and use our 3 psychological needs to build up motivation, this is going to make it a lot easier and help us to be slightly less reliant on simply discipline. And these 3 psychological needs are built on decades of research to understand what actually motivates us as humans. Our first psychological need is something called autonomy. In simple terms, the need to feel that we're in control of our lives. There's one classic experiment that demonstrates why exactly this matters. In 1971, Deci asked one simple question. If people already enjoy a task, what happens if you start paying them to do it? The aim was to test whether external monetary rewards would change intrinsic interest in an activity. The study took place over 3 days with 2 participant groups. They were given a task, and the task was the Soma puzzle. The aim was to replicate a certain configuration, but during this time, there was a point where the examiner, as it were, left, and they had free will to do whatever they wanted. But little did they know they were still being observed. On the first day, there was no reward for taking part in the puzzle, but most candidates in both participant groups continued to try to solve the puzzle and make these configurations, even though they were no longer being supervised. However, on the second day, one group was offered a reward for how many configurations they could match. They would be paid for how successful they were, whereas the other group on day 2 did the same task, but without any monetary reward. Unsurprisingly, the participant group that was getting paid spent more time trying to solve the puzzle than the other group, and than they did on day 1. In other words, they were now motivated by this extrinsic reward. But the twist happens on day 3. Both groups were still partaking in making these configurations. The group that was offered monetary reward on day 2 no longer was receiving any external rewards or getting paid for the configurations they make. The researchers told the participant group that they'd simply run out of money and couldn't afford to pay them for their work. The interesting thing is that the participant group that was paid on day 2 now worked less on solving the puzzle than they even did on day 1 when they weren't getting paid in the first place. But not only that, they spent less time on the puzzle than the group that had been doing it for 3 days without any reward. In short, introducing money increased engagement while it was present, but removing the money led to a drop in intrinsic interest below baseline, a pattern Deci interpreted as external rewards undermining intrinsic motivation for an already interesting task. The original paper reports the mean seconds spent on the puzzle across the sessions. The group that got paid on the second day started off at a medium level, then increased the amount of time they spent on the puzzle when getting paid, and then massively dropped off when the money reward was taken away. However, the second group had generally stable numbers across the 3 days. Now, why exactly is this so important? In this study, they've demonstrated that something we can be intrinsically motivated to do, something we genuinely find interesting, can change when we change our reason for doing it. So say you were taking in a hobby and then you did that hobby for money, and then that money was removed, you're less likely to enjoy the hobby than you did in the first place when money wasn't in the equation, because you did it for the sake of it. But when you change the purpose of why you do something, that can actually take away our innate and intrinsic motivation for doing that thing. That's the danger of carrots and sticks. External rewards can actually undermine intrinsic motivation to do something. Autonomy isn't about total freedom, it's about having a meaningful choice. At work, that might mean choosing how you approach a task without being micromanaged. In life, it can mean setting your own goals rather than following somebody else's checklist. When autonomy is supported, motivation becomes self-sustaining. But when it's stifled, people become disengaged. Now on to our second psychological need, mastery, otherwise referred to as competence. This is simply our drive to improve and get better at something. But not just any challenge motivates us. This is where the Goldilocks Zone comes in. I've spoken about this in my other video, speaking on habits. It is essentially the golden zone where the task isn't completely out of your capability range, which can lead to overwhelm, but also it's not too easy where we just get bored and it feels tedious. It's just right, something that challenges us, but if we push ourselves to improve and learn, we are capable of doing the task. These are the perfect things to partake in. It piques our interest, we have intrinsic motivation to do that, we're challenged, and we improve in the process. Think about learning an instrument, or training in the gym, or tackling a creative project. If the challenge is right in that sweet spot, time flies, we enter a flow state, and the results can be deeply satisfying. And like mentioned in the habit loop, if the reward is sweet, then it trains our brain to try and do that again, to try partake in that habit again. Daniel H. Pink highlights this. Mastery is less about arriving at perfection and more about engaging with the endless process of improvement. The pursuit itself becomes the energizing factor, the motivation we need. But there is a third drive. This is one of the drives that I find most useful for me. It engages what we actually care about, and of course that is purpose. Now, of course, it can be really hard sometimes to spend a lot of our time on something we find value in. We all find value in very different things, and bearing in mind a lot of us work for a living, a 9 to 5 or shift work or whatever you do to earn an income, it can be really hard to ensure that's something that feels purposeful. But even if it's a side project, if you choose something that provides you with gratification, that provides you with a sense of fulfillment, that you're doing something good or bettering yourself, then your motivation will generally sustain itself for a lot longer. For example, I didn't want to just make YouTube videos. I wanted to do something that would help other people understand what they can do to live better and speak about some of the practices I employ that I found have helped me live a better life. I find this fulfilling. I find value and purpose in it, and that changes for each and every person. But why exactly is finding a purpose or pursuing purposeful tasks so important? It's about our need to connect with something bigger than ourselves. Self-determination theory research shows that when people link their work to personal values or contribution, motivation becomes more resilient. It's not just about the payback, it's about the meaning. It's not just about the reward you might get or your pay slip at the end of the month. It's about the actual doing and the impact you can have in doing that task. Daniel puts it quite simply in his book. People are motivated to do something because it matters. Purpose is what transforms daily effort from a grind to a mission. Of course, it doesn't have to mean saving the world. It could mean raising a family. It could mean building a business that helps others. It could mean creating art. When actions are connected to a bigger why, discipline feels less like forcing and more like following fuel. So here's the big picture. Autonomy gives you freedom, mastery and competence provides you with progress, and purpose gives you meaning. This is the trifecta to feeling psychologically satisfied, feeling engaged day to day, having autonomy, being good at something and mastering something, and all this whilst pursuing something meaningful. Together, These three, derived from self-determination theory, comprise what Motivation 3.0 is all about. The type that doesn't rely on bribes and punishment, but comes from within us. And the research is very clear. When these needs are supported, people don't just perform better, they're happier, healthier, and more creative. When they're blocked, no amount of external rewards can fill the gap. So forget hacks and hustle culture. If you want motivation that lasts, focus on autonomy, mastery, and purpose. This is what the science of motivation has shown time and time again. And once you build a life around these needs, discipline isn't something that you need to force. It becomes something you want to do. You're motivated to do it. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to learn more about well-being, habits, and productivity, and how we can use neuroscience and psychology to improve our lives, then be sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me on all my other socials.